for Mayor and leader of the Animal Welfare Party, Vanessa Hudson, with us today. Now, Vanessa, I'm wondering why animal welfare is so important to you personally.
Well, my kind of personal introduction to thinking about animal rights issues goes back to when I was little, growing up. So when I was 7, we moved from the city, from Sheffield, to a village in the countryside. And in that village, there was a chicken slaughterhouse. So as a child with my friends, I watched some of those chickens being killed and their final moments before they were killed. And, I watched that several times. And really that had a profound influence upon me, upon kind of recognizing, at an early age that those animals wanted to live. They really struggled in the last few moments of their life. And the sound of them squawking as they went to their deaths, that sound kind of could be heard throughout the center of the village all day long as the factory was operating from, say, 9 to 5. So I knew from being quite young that those chickens, their lives mattered to them. And we rescued a couple of them and we kind of nursed them back to some kind of semi-normal life. And I realized just how smart and clever and interesting those chickens were, and how much their lives mattered. And then when I was at secondary school, someone came to my secondary school, a visiting speaker, as part of personal social education. And they talked about intensive farming, particularly the dairy industry and the egg industry. And kind of after that visiting speaker, I really then my eyes were opened to kind of how dairy milk is made and kind of what the average life of an egg laying hen is like. And I decided that I didn't really want to be part of that. So that's how I got into kind of thinking about animal rights. And then when I was about 21, I became vegan. So that's kind of my story into animal rights and veganism.
Yeah, and then the motto of the party is for people, animals, and the environment. How do you aim to tackle these issues at once?
Well, I think they're all interlinked, people, animals, and the environment. And I would kind of characterize our current approach to the world as being a speciesist approach. And by that, I mean that we have prioritized the interests of one species over those of all other species. And in our case, it's that we've prioritized the interests of human animals over the interests of all other species. And this, I believe, this kind of, as part of this, we have exploited the natural world, we've exploited animals, we've exploited the environment. And this has led us to this point where we are right now here in 2021, where we are, to my mind, facing a triple crisis, a crisis of health, with this zoonotic pandemic that we're living through, a crisis of climate, where we are facing irreversible climate change, and a crisis of biodiversity, where up to 1 million species are at risk of extinction. And all of these 3 crises threaten our own human existence now. So I would say that actually tackling speciesism, our preoccupation with ourselves, is central to us tackling these 3 crises that face us right now. And it's about us realizing that we are part of the natural world. We're not separate from it. We're part of it. And if we are going to hand over a planet that's habitable to our kids and grandkids, that we have to understand that we're part of an ecosystem, and we must have balance in each of those areas. So how do we plan to do this? It's by promoting an approach where we kind of we realize it's not all about us, basically, and we learn to live in balance.
Yeah, and you mentioned how we need to realize that it's not all about us, but some would stress that in areas of where animals are kept in captivity, for example, zoos and aquaria in London, that brings tourism and that can boost the economy. Is that something that, how would you be aiming to kind of switch away from that?
Well, I think it's time for, I think London is a brilliant and an amazing city, and I wouldn't be standing for Mayor of London if I didn't truly believe in London's potential. And obviously we have this really proud history of thought leadership here in London and across the UK. We have done some brilliant things in our time. We've done some awful things as well, but we have at the same time done some brilliant things. And I think really now it's time for London to just step up and say, we are going to reimagine ourselves as a healthy, sustainable, compassionate city. That is our brand. That's what we want to be known as. And we are just going to define ourselves that way. And, we can promote ourselves as having, by having festivals and events and art shows, cultural exhibitions, where we promote our compassionate side, our visionary side, basically. And to kind of say, well, we do it through, keeping our zoos going, propping them up, keeping our zoos going because they attract tourism. I don't think that's the kind of city we want to be in the year 2021. To me, it's like stepping back into the past, keeping wild animals captive because that would generate money. I just think London can do so much better than that. We are better than that and we can do better.
Okay. And another issue, a key issue, is climate change, which you've pledged to make carbon emissions net zero by the year 2025. And now that's really quite ambitious. How do you actually plan to make that happen?
Well, my pledge in my mayoral address is that we push for carbon net zero status by 2025, which is a couple of years before the current ambition of 2030. And I'm saying push for because what I've realized by being in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, as you will have done too, is that when we collectively, globally, put our minds to solving something of an epic nature that threatens our existence, we can move heaven and earth to do that, to make it happen. And kind of what we've seen happen over the last year and a half, as the globe, including the UK, struggled to kind of address the coronavirus pandemic, is we saw governments move fast and they put in place all kinds of actions that you would never have contemplated. So, the kind of the support that businesses and individuals have had from our government to kind of prop them up to keep working whilst people haven't been able to go to work. We would never have thought we would have seen that. And yet coronavirus showed us that we could do that. We could do the impossible when it came to saving ourselves. And I would like the climate to be treated with that same level of urgency, because this is about saving ourselves. I don't know why we don't see the climate crisis with the same epic, awful level of urgency that we've just seen the coronavirus pandemic. It's a threat of equal measure, but for some reason we keep kind of kicking it into the long grass and thinking, oh, it's in the future, it doesn't matter. But it's happening now. Irreversible climate change is it's with us. And so it requires a fast, proportionate response. So some of the ways I believe that we can do that, I really think we now have to push the idea of us living to personal carbon quotas. And that's not to kind of penalize anyone or say, oh, your lifestyle is too extravagant. It's to say, look, here's the reality of what we have to work with in terms of our carbon budget. This is what these activities use out of that carbon budget. It's up to you how you spend your carbon budget. You have choice there, but this is what it costs. And so, for example, if you take a long haul flight, then what are you going to cut elsewhere in your life for a year or over what period you might want to look at it? Because I think we do need, as individuals, as consumers, to understand that we are working to a kind of incredibly finite carbon budget now, and the solutions to climate change lie within us, our behavior as consumers. Of course, it lies with big business as well. I'm not trying to shunt this onto individuals, but I think we're the key. It's us realizing the kind of peril that we're in is the key to solving this.
And isn't climate change a kind of international issue? Does it require international change? And if so, can change in London make that happen?
Yeah, obviously it's an international problem. And if the rest of the world doesn't kind of do what we're doing, then we can't solve the problem. But we're in this really fantastic position of other countries looking to us to see what we do. People look to see what's happening in London, in the UK. People kind of follow the examples that we've set, particularly, say, for example, around diet. So, we're eating a diet that I would say is utterly unsustainable. We eat a lot of animal products, quite often for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And although we have a global human population of 7 billion, we have a farmed animal population of 70 billion. And that farmed animal population, which is sitting there. It's massive. It's sitting there just to cater to our desire to eat those animal products. And, you know, this is, as we have adopted a diet like that, other countries have looked to us and emulated our diet. And now we have what I would call a crazy, unsustainable diet going on in almost every country in the world now. And when I say we've got great influence, we really have. If we start doing things differently, if we imagine ourselves as this new forward-thinking country and city that lives sustainably, then I think, yeah, the rest of the world pays attention and starts wanting to emulate the way we're doing things. That's the idea. So yeah, we have huge potential, and particularly around diet. That is, you know, one of the main things we're promoting is we have to shift to plant-based diets. There is no way around that.
How do you aim to do that? Because it's quite a big change, and people like to keep to their habits that they've been living off for years. So how do you actually aim to make that cultural change?
Well, there are lots of levers that people in positions of power can use to influence diets. Now, this is not to say to people, you know, you can't do something, because that's never going to work. But there are areas where we have influence, where, for example, out of the public purse, we are paying for food that's eaten. So in schools, in care homes, in nurseries, in hospitals, and certain government workplaces, we are the food that's served there is paid for out of the public purse. And our suggestion is that if you're going to use public funds to pay for food, then that should not cause problems for society later down the line. And we know that serving animal products causes problems for society later down the line. And therefore, it's not a good use of public funds. So if you're going to go to school and you're going to eat a school meal, that school meal should really be plant-based. A compromise would be to say there always has to be a plant-based option. So that's always available. But really, I can't think of a rationale for using public funds that cause problems for society later down the line. So that's one way that you have influence. Another way is by promoting public health and education campaigns wherever you have a platform. So kind of on billboards on the street, in doctors' surgeries, on the tube as you travel, on the side of buses. We've great scope for actually influencing, you know, what people understand about healthy, sustainable eating. And I don't think that's being used really to its fullest extent at all.
Okay, and there are quite a few parties who are aiming to tackle climate change. Do you think the presence of so many parties may kind of split the vote away from this necessary change?
In the case of the London elections, I don't. I think it's good that we've got a lot of parties all saying they care about climate change and they want to do something. I think in the way the London elections work, I think the result of the London elections is kind of something of a foregone conclusion at this stage. But I think it's good that we know that message is being sent very loudly to those who will take over the reins of power, that climate change matters to people. So I don't think this is really an election where the vote is going to be split. But what I hope it shows, I hope it demonstrates that this issue really matters to people. So, you know, really, I think there's been a lack of ambition in terms of policies on climate over recent years. I'm not saying that Sadiq Khan has had a lack of ambition, but definitely in terms of the UK government, there's been a complete lack of ambition. You know, 2019, UK Parliament declared a climate emergency. And yet, from that point onwards, I would say very little has been done to kind of reflect the fact that we're in a climate emergency. And so even if you look at the way in London, for example, Transport for London is funded, the funding structure, we really need to incentivize people into catching public transport. You know, if you have an option between private car, private vehicle, or public transport, you should be choosing public transport. And one of the ways you can do that is by funding it properly. So making those fares cheaper, making sure public transport is always the safer, cheaper, most effective option, you know, getting you from A to B as quickly as possible. But our funding structure for Transport for London is dreadful. You know, it's funded mainly by fares. So it's funded by the people that use it. and it's not funded adequately by central government. And that's, one area where I think the message needs to be sent loud and clear to central government, that if you're serious about solving climate change, if you've declared a climate emergency, one of the main areas you have to look at is emissions from transport. And one of the ways you cut that clearly is by incentivizing public transport. If you're not doing that, you're not serious about combating climate change, in my opinion.
Okay. And your slogan is London, let's lead. How do you plan to actualize that in London?
Well, I plan to actualize it by winning the mayoral election. That would be the best result. And declaring that we are going to go forwards as a city that reimagines itself as a healthy, sustainable, compassionate city. So the intention is that we can lead on that front by promoting it, the best version of ourselves that we could be, the version we'd like to be. If we looked in the mirror, that's what we'd like to see. So yeah, I want us to show leadership on all of those areas, on healthy living, on sustainable living, and compassionate living. And that last point for me, compassionate living, is about ending speciesism, because I believe if there is a city where we're going to start dismantling speciesism, it's here in London, and I think we can do it. I wouldn't be standing for election if I didn't think we could dismantle speciesism here in London.
Thank you, Vanessa Hudson, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thank you.